Welcome to the BS and Beer Show, last one of 2020. So thanks for joining us. Tonight's topic is healthy buildings. This book brought out a lot of great discussion. So I'm super excited to hear. There was a lot going on Instagram and kicking around. So it's going to be a great discussion tonight. Something that it's been a hot topic in our industry. So I'm glad we're going to cover it. I'm Emily Mottram, architect here in Maine. My buddy Armando is not on, and I brought my cookie tonight for him, just for him.
Look at the size of that thing.
I know, right? But it's a little crazy, but no, I'm continuing with the wine down to Christmas with my family. So tonight's my actual wine night, and I'm having a Villa 116 red blend. So cheers to everybody. We want to encourage local groups. So we got this started because our local group couldn't meet through doing this and being national. Lots of other groups have started. There are a couple of new groups who are thinking about popping up. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you are local and you want to start your own group, or you want to connect with some other people to start one, just reach out to some of us and we'll give you some tips on how we started ours. Otherwise, I wanted to thank Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building for being our media partners here at the BS and Beer Show and helping us make this happen every week. So that's off to you, Kylie.
Thanks, Emily. Enjoy that cookie. I'm senior editor at Green Building Advisor, and I'm drinking sparkling mineral water, nothing to write home about. And my charge here is to let you know how to use the sort of like the mechanics of the show. So if you're new, check out the chat box at the bottom. That's where half the action happens. Just be sure, if you want to participate, to click on all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your questions and comments. And if you are on a mobile device watching, you may need to do this at each time. And if you only see one person on the screen, you may need to switch to the speaker or gallery view at the top of the screen on the right-hand side. There's a mailing list that Fine Home Building sends out Zoom reminders each week. And if you want more information delivered to your inbox, join that mailing list at thebsandbeershow.com, or you can check out the weekly blog post that I put together on GBA that goes up live on Sundays. Tonight, we're going to have a brief presentation, which we weren't expecting, but Kyle has generously offered to put a little something together for us, which is always a bonus. And then we'll have a panel discussion about the book. And of course, we'll always take audience questions. We'll wrap up at 7:30. And if you're interested in looking at a video recording for tonight's show, that'll be available again on Green Building Advisor, where we encourage you to continue the conversation, and all past shows can be found on YouTube through the link at thebsandbeershow.com. We've just launched this audio only version of the BS and Beer Show, which is available wherever podcasts are found. Check it out. Sometimes presentations are a big part of it, but sometimes audio is just as pleasurable. So I think that's all I have. Travis or Mike, I'm not sure. Somebody is introducing our guests, but I didn't check to see who. Is it Travis or Mike?
I'll do the guest, but Mike's going to do announcements first.
Okay, no, right, announcements.
Yes, I'm Mike Maines. Tonight I am drinking a hibiscus and ginger raw unfiltered kombucha. Not too many announcements tonight. If anybody is interested in local groups, we have Steve Jacobs is very interested in a group in or near Colorado Springs. I have his email address. If anybody's interested, get in touch and we'll connect you. That small group start, just a couple of people start getting together to talk about building science, and it goes from there. There's also some interest in the Woodstock. Have mentioned that they'd be interested, so we'd be happy to connect people if they're interested. In other announcements, AIA Initial Architects Network is hosting a webinar on high performance home builders. That's Tuesday, January 26th. Coming right up. coming right up on Monday, the Washington, D.C. BS and Beer, who you saw here a couple of episodes ago. Their topic is fireplaces and high performance, add another log or extinguish the idea. Clever title, and it's sure to be an interesting conversation. I'll also put some links into Emily's building science podcast, which is Energy and Efficiency with Emily, and a few other links to find us at the BS and Beer Show. And now I will turn it over to Travis, to guests tonight.
Hello, good evening. I'm Travis Brungard. I'm in Kansas City, and I am drinking a Boulevard Brewing Smooth Fuzz, and it's a peach sour ale, and I'm drinking enough for Kylie and for Mike and anyone else who's not drinking. Big bottle, because I didn't love the book, I wanted to love the beer. So that's my beer, and hello. And I'm going to introduce our wonderful guests tonight. We've got quite a few. I'm going to knock out their bios quick and then give them a chance to say something about themselves. So around the horn, I'll start with Lloyd. Lloyd Alter is a design editor for treehugger.com, and has contributed to The Guardian, Azure Magazine, and did book reviews for Corporate Knights Magazine. Previously, he practiced as an architect and real estate developer in Toronto, Canada. He teaches sustainable design at the Ryerson University Faculty of Arts and Design. He's finishing touches on a book, Living the 1.5 Degree Lifestyle, out in 2021 from New Society Publishers. He never goes without his Plume Flow air quality monitor. And I would like, there it is, right on cue. Well done, Lloyd. What are you drinking tonight, man? Tell us something more about yourself than just your bio.
I am drinking a Steam Whistle, which is a local premium Pilsner. In Canada, all the beer bottles are returnable. It gets refilled up to 30 times. And I want to make the point, since we're talking about health, that all of you people drinking out of cans, the liners are made with bisphenol A, epoxy, and it leaches out an endocrine disruptor into you. So I'm glad
Lloyd.
Travis has got a bottle.
I'm a big glass fan.
Good. And so that's why I'm always drinking out of a bottle. That was my big point to make.
Well done, sir. Thanks for joining us tonight, and nice to meet you, by the way.
Thanks.
Our next guest, Sean McStay, the host of Better Construction Podcast and also a YouTube channel where design and construction techniques, products, and the business of construction is discussed. Sean uses insight from his career in sales, marketing, and management within the building materials sector to interview industry professionals that include architects, contractors, and engineers. He provides a platform for audience members to learn about new and innovative products from high-performance construction industry professionals. And it's a great podcast. I've enjoyed it for quite a while, and so I'm grateful that you joined us tonight. Sean, what are you drinking?
No drinking for me today. I'm out on the West Coast, so it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. So I do have a glass of water. That's about it. But
very professional of you.
I try. Every once in a while, I have to try. But Travis, appreciate the invite, and glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Our next guest, Kyle Macht, is a returning guest. He is a certified passive house consultant at Macht Architecture. Kyle originally worked for Paul Macht Architects over the summers while studying architectural engineering at Pennsylvania State University. After graduating, Kyle worked for a green design build firm that also specialized in energy consulting. Kyle started as an energy consultant for commercial buildings and new homes, after which he transitioned to the lead architectural designer while also managing the construction of several projects. Kyle rejoined Paul to create Macht Architecture in 2015, something they have talked about ever since. Kyle originally worked with Paul. I'm doing a terrible job with reading these. The font size is just a little bit off, and I didn't mean to blow through that, Kyle. Improve on.
I need to rewrite that anyways. It sort of makes me sound a little younger.
Look
anyway, not a problem.
You have
36 today, so
really?
Today is my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. There's some jokes in the chat box already about that. So.
Well, thanks for spending your birthday with us, man. That's very kind of you. What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking some water, H2O, from the tap, and I am really hoping that there aren't 50 parts per trillion PFAS in the water that I'm drinking, because that is what the measured rate is at the university, which is a mile up the street, University of Rhode Island. We are on a separate well, however, so I don't know. I haven't seen the true test results for the PFAS in our water from the tap, but I'm not sure it's reported on the thing that we get either. So anyway.
You building science guys, you're all so dialed in on the parts per million of everything. I'm excited about that. But thank you for joining us, Kyle. It's good to have you back.
Thanks.
Finally, we have June Donenfeld. She's a freelance writer, editor, and writing coach with special interests in green building, social entrepreneurship, education, and design. In previous lives, she's also worked as a program officer for the United States-Japan Foundation in New York, an editor and writer for the International Language and Culture Center in Tokyo, a financial analyst for Morgan Stanley in New York, a cross-cultural trainer in Osaka, and a senior researcher for a Japanese governmental agency in San Francisco. She's also served as a board member of Yokohama International School and a community leader at the International School of Paris. She holds a BA from Oberlin College, an MA from Stanford University, and has completed programs of study at the Sorbonne in Paris and Middlebury College in Vermont. And if I botched that, you can fix it now, June. It's nice to have you with us tonight.
No, you're all good. You're all good.
Thank you. What are you drinking tonight?
Well, before Lloyd told me that I was actually killing myself, so I told you I'm packing up to leave, right? So we're getting low for drinkables in the house, but I want to draw your attention to the oh so very Bay Area motto of the company. Can you read it?
You'll have to read it out loud for us.
Okay, you ready? Oh my God, I don't know if I can. Are we ready? I'm glad you don't have food in your mouth or anything, right? You're good? Okay. Apple-driven dry ciders.
Apple-driven dry ciders.
Anything
alliteration in its best form.
Yeah, anything with 500 miles has to be blah blah driven. So, but yes, it's from Sonoma County, which is just hop, skip, and a jump from San Francisco, where I am now, but not for long. 3 more weeks, and that's it. Going.
I got on late. Where are you headed? Tell our viewers where you're headed.
Where Emily lives.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
and
where Mike lives.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody else in Maine? No, Kylie, you're in
Connecticut.
Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
And Kyle, Rhode Island, right? And we have okay, yeah. So yes, East Coast bound.
Well, that's it for introductions. We've been around the horn. I think it's time to start the show. I think, Emily, do you have some introductory comments? Is that right? Or am I wrong about that?
You're wrong about that, but I'm actually going to kick it back to Kyle since he did a presentation and be like, start us off, Kyle.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys are pushing this too much. I just threw a couple web pages together to share for those that aren't up to speed. And so I guess we're assuming most people have read this, which is right behind me here. But if you haven't, there's some things that I think are missing in this book. Great start for a book. And I think the biggest thing for me that's missing goes right between the word healthy and buildings, and that's office. And so this book was so driven by Fortune 500 companies, buildings in New York City, really focusing on the high class, high wealth, big companies. And that's who's paying for Joseph Allen and John Macomber to come and be their consultants. So, I get it, that's their case studies, but it's missing a huge population of the buildings in this country and on the planet. And it's also missing a huge portion of the wealth of the non-privileged in our society. And so I think it's a great first step, but it's being a little bit, it's a little misleading in terms of it's not very encompassing of the entire building landscape, if you will. And so that's sort of my first big comment. But if the word office was added, it would make a huge difference and it would be very more descriptive of the book. But to get into a couple things here, so you see behind me are the 9 foundations of the healthy buildings movement. And so we've got, it's actually hard to read because it's small here, but the main ones that they talked about was air quality. And so that was a big topic of the book. They talked a little bit about other things. One of the main ones that I tend to focus a lot on, and I think the other building scientists on the panel here tend to focus a lot on, is water. That's the one thing that destroys buildings, and that also leads to a lot of potential other factors that lead to poor health from an indoor air quality perspective, from potential mold growth, potential insects. There's a lot that goes into water management, and I felt like they only scratched the surface at managing that. And then in terms of certifications, and that's where I wanted to do a quick screen share here, as long as I am enabled to share my screen, which I am not at the moment. Whoever's the host.
You should be able to now.
All right, and I can. So the first, there was a lot of conversation about LEED and WELL, and I'm a little new to WELL. I know of it, but I don't know it in depth. I got more information from this book than I had in a while. I also deal in the single family custom residential, more so than anything else. So WELL is very much for large commercial buildings, from what I understand. But the Living Building Challenge and the International Living Future Institute, their primary focus is healthy buildings. And I think that they're, in my opinion, the gold standard for what buildings could be and what they should be. And I think that this is certainly a website that people should get familiar with. And there's a couple things that they do that I think are really helpful. And it's a lot of where I start in product specification. And so there's a thing called, well, actually, this is the red list. And so they have a list of different chemicals that they don't allow in their buildings. And so there's a whole long list. You can download a whole spreadsheet that includes all of them, and it's quite significant. And Joseph Allen did talk a little bit about the idea behind that, but the list is available, the red list. And there's also something that goes along with that called the declare label. And so this is meant for product manufacturers to display what the carbon impact is and what is in their product. And so you can see that it'll check the box of red list approved or not. And so this will really help you. And it's something that we need to do as an industry to reach out to. Whenever we talk to product manufacturers, we need to ask for a declare label. And if we're not all doing it, it's making less of an impact than it could be. And so I would encourage everybody, if you're specifying products, when you go and talk to the product manufacturer, hey, do you have a declare label for that? What's that? Oh, this is what it is. Let's talk about how we can get that and push for it. And if they don't get it, at least you ask them. And then the next person that asks, eventually they'll get the product out there. And maybe you'll say you won't use their product if they don't give you the declare label. And so there's a list on the Living Future website of all of the products that are already certified to meet this. So this is where I go if I'm going to specify drywall. Hey, what's on this list? What do I know is allowed in a healthy building to start? What membranes, what insulation products, what office furniture is in this? And this is a limited list, and so there's a lot more that needs to go into this list. But this is where I tend to start sometimes when I'm looking for products to see if it does in fact go on this list. Another thing, this book was written before COVID-19. And so I will copy this link and post it in there, but this is Joseph Allen on the right, top right here. And so he did a presentation just recently at the University of Rhode Island that I'm still watching, and I'm partway way through. I skipped back a little bit on certain sections, but this is primarily related to school buildings and COVID-19 and health that's in that. And I felt like they didn't talk about school buildings quite as much as I was really hoping for in the Healthy Buildings book. And so this is a whole presentation by Joseph Allen and others, but I thought this was worth sharing for other people to get into. And that was all I had in terms of quick screen share. But I can post these links in the chat box.
I'd like to go next if I can, because I want to talk directly about this issue about COVID-19 and how it affects the book. When I was first asked to do this, I looked at the book and said, why is this book $42 for this little thing? And which it was. And then I realized, well, it's from the Harvard publisher, and it's written by a Harvard guy at health and a Harvard business school guy. And it's one of those typical business books that Harvard cranks out. They got to be short, and they got to be quick, and they got to read in an airplane, and they've got to get the information out. And this was a joint venture between like Joseph Allen, who I tremendously admire. I've been following him all year. He was one of this gang of building scientists and engineers and health people who went after the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control to get them to realize that the COVID-19 virus was airborne. And they really changed everything and were a huge, powerful force in doing this. Very important. And it's a joint venture with this real estate developer. Now, I was, yes, with Robert Bean, somebody just commented, a friend of mine, and Shelley Miller, and all of these other people who really did incredibly important work. After I was an architect, I was a successful real estate developer in the 90s until I suddenly became an unsuccessful real estate developer and then a writer, which I am now. And so I looked at this and I'd read so many of these business books. And I have to read one quote from it from the preface. The convergence of health science, building science, and business science is revealing what is perhaps the greatest untapped business and health opportunity of our time. As the green building movement transitions to the healthy building movement, savvy business leaders can capitalize on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity by tapping into the science underpinning these three previously siloed disciplines. Well, as soon as I read that, I knew where this was going, and you know where it's going. And the problem is it's two different books. There's the building science stuff, which Joe is good on, and it's absolutely directed to the office building market. Says right in it, this book is aimed at the commercial real estate market in leading cities. And then it's a business book. And the building science part of it is very successful. And the business science of it is a complete mess because the book came out at the exact same time as the COVID crisis hit. I saw a tweet Joseph Allen put out saying, well, I didn't want it to be like this when I launched my book on April 8th, went right at the time at the peak of the first wave of the crisis. And so it then goes through a chapter of spreadsheets and pro formas and say, if you invest in ventilation, your people will be healthier and you'll be more profitable. Meanwhile, ASHRAE came out and the building code changed and everybody's cranking ventilation. We don't need to read half a book that's telling us we have to crank up the ventilation. Everybody's done it. And the building population is half as big as it used to be. So everybody's getting more air, better air, filtered air. So the whole real estate science section fails. It's been made completely moot by the crisis. They talked about all these mega trends, but the biggest mega trend at all is COVID, which is an existential crisis for the commercial real estate business. So, that whole part of the book is really just not worth reading in a sense now. The third facet I would look at is when they go on about sort of green building and saying green building has is changed, it's healthy buildings, as if it hasn't been a continuum all the way through. Green building is healthy building now. Everybody believes that. They're indistinguishable.
I'm not sure I believe that, but let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, these everybody qualifications are a little broad scoped.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the well, which you were, right now, LEED was the big deal, and then health became a big deal, and right now, well is eating LEED's lunch. I mean, every building out there is going well, and nobody's paying any attention to LEED, because it's true, the movement is going. But to say that the green building movement didn't care about health is just wrong. There's all these different parts of it, from, as you say, Living Building Challenge, which cares. Well, which cares, Fit Well, which cares, all of these things. One little faction of the green building movement didn't come along. So I could keep going all night. I wrote a whole post on it today. I have pages and pages and pages. But, my final conclusion, I would say, is it's an interesting book, not relevant to anyone, I don't think, who's watching this show. You can probably, by going to the website that Joe has at TH Chan, and if you read the 9 foundations of Kyle Moose's head, if you just Google, move your head so everyone can see what's behind you there. If you just Google the 9 foundations of a healthy building, you'll basically get all the important stuff. And I hope Joseph Allen isn't watching this because I'll be so embarrassed.
I knew I could count on you, Lloyd, for some ammunition.
Lloyd, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question. So once COVID is effectively behind us, do you think there will be a return to, not the same levels, I don't think that's going to happen, but a return to occupants of large office buildings?
Absolutely not. I think that there's been a fundamental change. For the last 20, 30 years, we've been in this third industrial revolution of computers, and management just never wanted to let people out. They said, you've got to work in the office. We have to supervise you. You've got to have bums and seats. And what they found through this is that they can actually manage a great proportion of the people who are actually working at home and want to work at home. And they're not stupid. They're not going to pay all of this rent in these towers when they can have people working at home and being just as productive. So, all of the studies that I see are about half the people are going to come back and about half the people are going to be able to keep working at home. It's going to be absolutely economically fabulous for the companies, and it's going to continue to be a complete disaster for the real estate industry. And frankly, the only buildings that are going to be rented are going to be the healthiest ones with the best fresh air and the best maintenance, and all of the rest are going to just be see-throughs. I should explain, that's a real estate term where you just can look right through a building, see right through it, because there's nothing.
Where did you say you lived, Lloyd?
Toronto.
I think you're a little ahead of the times than we are in the United States in many areas. And I'm hopeful that you're right in all of that. And just to clarify that one point on the green building. And so I do believe in general that a green building should be a healthy building. However, there's a lot of green building certifications out there, including Passive House, which is one of my favorites, that really aren't necessarily geared toward a healthy building. You can have a passive house that's completely made of natural materials, or you could have a passive house that's pumped full of spray foam and chemicals and still meet the certification. And passive house is primarily energy driven with a little bit of focus on, well, there's a huge focus on health and comfort, but not as much on the toxicity of chemicals inside the structures. So there is a little bit of a disconnect, I'd say, in a lot of the different certifications out there. And that's why I like the Living Building Challenge so much. And it seems like WELL is similar for the large commercial sector.
Well, I could argue about that all night. I see George is here from England, looking and paying attention to this, who is one of the leaders in making passive houses as green and as natural as they can possibly be. And if he had a mic, he could really, really give you an argument there.
And I know that that's the direction Passive House wants to go, from Katrin Klingenberg herself, at least Passive House Institute United States. That's what she said that their future is, and that's what they hope to be. They're just not there yet.
So I feel like the basic premise of this book was that healthy buildings they represent a business opportunity, right? So they are a capitalist venture opportunity. So how do we capitalize on that? How do we use that, if that be the case, to push the needle for healthier buildings? And how does that trickle down to, yes, you're right, the focus was on commercial buildings, but it doesn't mean that all of what was stated in this book can't be applied to residential buildings. So there's a way in which to push the needle here. And I feel like, it all boils down to cost speaks to people much more so than health, whether it be occupant or environmental. So how do we, is it strictly elitist, or is there something here to work with? I feel like there is something to work with.
There's definitely something to work with, but it is definitely elitist. And that was one thing that really I had trouble with. And frankly, most of my projects are elitist.
I was going to say, Living Building Challenge
that can hire me. So
as exciting as Living Building Challenge is, and as much of a supporter of it is, that it's very elitist. I mean,
yes.
So, but it's not to disqualify it as really important and valuable.
And I feel that the work that I do, Yeah, I feel the work that I do, as well as what Living Building Challenge is about, is somebody needs to pave the path, and
Right.
somebody needs to push that forward so that others can follow. And eventually it'll come down and trickle down. Is it going to take too long? Probably. But you know, I'm at least, I like to pave the path personally. That's how I see myself in this world. And that's what the type of work that I like to do, is pushing things beyond the boundaries that have been done before. So does that mean I'm designing for the low income housing? Not yet. Maybe I'll get to that someday. But I think that what's nice in a way, so passive house generally could be considered a green building and a healthy building. And there are many places, including New York City, where a lot of the low income housing is going passive house. And so there's a lot more passive house, low income housing buildings being built in New York City than most other buildings, which I find absolutely fascinating. But there is some incentives through politics that allow healthy buildings to be implemented in the low income housing.
Well, I could keep talking forever, but I want to hear from June and Sean.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something that Kyle just said about politics and overall just my general opinion of the book. I read it from a layman's point of view exclusively, and I took notes. Can you see? I took notes. But if you look at what the kind of subtitle of the book is, it says how indoor spaces drive performance and productivity. So if you read that,
Makes no sense. It's terrible English. It's
but it also makes it apparent what audience they're aiming at, and that's fine. That's fine. I think that even if the book results in small ripple effect changes, that's good. I was frustrated by the book in terms of the many times that the authors said, effectively, if you want change to happen, you have to push for it. And it's not that I don't agree, I totally agree. But for the vast majority of people out there who aren't experts, but do care, that's a terrible place to start. People need resources. I really would have welcomed some guidance about how one can push or exert pressure other than by voting or calling, at least in the US, your local Congress people. I wish much more attention had been paid to what he only took, or they rather, only took up the end of the book, which was other buildings, so non-office buildings. It wasn't the purpose of the book, so he did give it very short shrift. It did appear last chapter, made just references in passing to other types of buildings, including residential. But overall, I'm not sure this is the book that I would go to for some guidance about how to effect change. It did spark lots of interest for me in terms of, need to read this article. So I read a couple of articles that were cited. If any of you or anybody who's watching have not read the New Yorker article that's cited in there about indoor air pollution, it's really good, written really well, extremely engaging. And it's very fast to read. I looked up a couple of the organizations, again, very interesting. Over in the Netherlands, the organization that analyzes buildings, that was very interesting. The whole chapter on chemicals, makes you want to run screaming from the room. I felt very grateful that I didn't put any flame retardant nightwear on either of my kids. I don't know if any of you have felt flame retardant clothing. It's awful. And now we know why. So I I hope that whatever the writers of this book intended to happen will happen. It just needs to happen on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, so for me, I'm about to get kicked out of the chat, I think, because I'm a business guy. I've been in business and management for like 15 years now. That's my thing. I've taken some courses from the Harvard Business School. They most of the time know what they're doing, especially when they price their courses. They make a lot of money on that. So that's the angle that I take with these things. Now, I care a lot about green building. I'm a certified Passivhaus consultant. I've been mostly working in the high performance construction side of things my entire career, with windows, doors, ventilation, heating, all these different things. All that said, I come to it from that angle. The biggest stumbling blocks that we have right now in the industry are consumer adoption and the cost of what it is to build green. And if we can have these large Fortune 500 companies basically sponsor or fund, or however you want to say it, moving towards that by buying lots of the products, which drives the price down, and having lots of job sites build to these standards, which trains people how to do it and drives the price down, and have lots and lots of people live in these buildings and experience what it's like to live in or work, I guess, in a passive house office building or something like that, then that's what they want, and that drives consumer adoption. So for me, while I understand this book is, and I was maybe a little too hyped going into it when I read the book, because I was expecting like the holy grail of building science and green building, and it is not that. It is exactly what it says it is on the cover. I agree with Lloyd that there are parts of it that are, unfortunately not really as accurate anymore as they maybe were when they were written. But overall, anything we can do to shift a large amount of money and people into healthier buildings so they can experience them, and we can fund these jobs, which then reduces the price to everyone else, is a big help. And I think that our industry, and I don't think anyone on this panel is guilty of it, but I quite often see in our industry, we expect perfection. We expect one standard that's going to make everything perfect, and we expect, all of everything to be perfect and healthy, and it needs to be healthy. It needs to be zero carbon. It needs to, feed the sick, clothe the poor, turn water into wine, and make ventilation perfect in every building. And we can't get there with one thing. We need to work towards that. So on one side, you have greenwashing, which is bad. And on the other side, you sometimes have an equally militant group of people that are pushing for perfection when we're not there yet as an industry. So for me, the book was very interesting. The building science parts were quite interesting. I also am a layman. I'm by no means an expert in this, so I learned some stuff in there. Some of it was maybe repeated a few too many times. But overall, interesting as a guidebook for all building typologies, definitely not there.
Definitely was left frustrated, but absolutely glad I read it. Very excited to read it, and I was very happy I was forced to read it by being a panelist on this. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have gotten it done in time. I am curious if the authors actually are a step ahead of us in thinking that the only way that change might happen is to just go towards the Fortune 500 companies instead of focus on the entire country as a whole. And they do talk about that a little bit. I forget which chapter it was, in terms of starting out with the small adopters and then working your way down to everybody else.
Yeah, that was the very last one.
Yeah, I wonder if the only way to really get change is to just approach the big corporations. I mean, the country for the past 4 years has not been providing the change from a building science and a climate change perspective, but big corporations have looked at that a little bit. And from health, big corporations have made some progress, and they do have the money to invest in things like this. And sometimes the bottom, grassroots up, I love that approach too. But maybe to invoke change real quick, to buy materials, like you were saying, at large quantities very quickly, maybe it needs to be the big giant buildings that push the industry forward. In terms of red list free materials, and me asking for, hey, I need 100 square feet of this membrane. What's the declare level on that? Oh, I need 4 billion square feet of this membrane. It's going to make a huge difference in terms of who's asking. So
Yeah, I mean,
maybe they're aware of that, and that's what they were really pushing for. Maybe that's why they wrote the book, because they know that this is, well, it's their clients, but they know this may be how you can get change done fastest.
But they're already there, the Fortune 500 corporations. They're the ones who supported LEED, and they're the ones who left LEED and are doing everything with WELL right now. And to give an example where I don't think the book is ahead of the game, but it's really behind the game, is that in the last chapter, it talks about the JP Morgan Chase building that's going up on Park Avenue right now. And they talked about how wonderful and green it was going to be. Well, in fact, the JP Morgan Chase building, they're demolishing a classic building that was done by the first woman architect to do a major building like that, the biggest voluntary demolition of a building in America ever, and they're throwing away 2 million square feet of embodied carbon in the existing building now to build a building twice as big. And to top it off, that building just 9 years ago was renovated top to bottom to LEED Platinum. So it's barely out of warranty. So here you've got a book talking about the future of green building as healthy building, completely missing the carbon picture altogether, picking what is basically an embodied carbon catastrophe, tearing down this 2 million square foot building. And if anyone doesn't know what the future of green building is, it's definitely about embodied carbon and the carbon that goes into and the whole carbon issue. But the only carbon dioxide they know about is the stuff inside the building, not outside the building.
Well, how do you sell that, Lloyd? I think that they're trying to make the business case for healthy buildings so that they can make movement happen. So how do you?
But the business case has already been made. That's why everybody's going with WELL, and you're talking 400,
everybody's
500.
going with WELL?
I think if you look right now, it's insane. I think WELL is a bit of a fraud and a bit of feel good, and it's more Gwyneth Paltrow than anything else. But it's
Sorry,
still
Gwyneth, if you're watching.
incredibly popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well,
I mean, I may be a little bit where Kylie, I think, is going with this. And Lloyd, I love you, and I love all of your articles. But to say that all Fortune 500 companies are going green building and going to WELL,
I
I think it's a bit of hyperbole.
Okay, I do that.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's a good writer. But it's. I think the focus of the book is what it says on the front of the book. I think if we read too far into that, we're expecting too much out of it. They are 100% satisfying their clients because that's what's going to make them money. They can show, hey, I have this book. Look at this. Do you want to pay me my $1,000 an hour to come and work at your company? Now, tearing down that building is a catastrophe that should never have happened. So using that as an example is a bit of a joke, really. The challenge, though, is that I think it was mentioned in the comments, there's an adoption curve, and we need to get people across that adoption curve. And right now, if we're going out to your average person who is renting a house or maybe not average these days, but building a house, buying a house, they don't really understand green building. They don't understand what makes a healthy building, what doesn't make a healthy building. I mean, these are the people that when you say the building is going to be airtight, they ask how they're going to breathe, and that's not a joke against them. That's education that isn't happening yet. And so again, if we can have these, whichever of the companies will pay for it, to make these spaces that people can be comfortable and healthy in and experience, and train all the people, that's the big one. Train the people and get the products down to a price that makes sense. Because when you're building, like I do a lot of work with Passive House, so that's where my mindset comes from. But if I'm talking to a contractor, even multifamily commercial Passive House, the first time they build a Passive House, it's 10, 15, 20% more than what they normally build. The fifth time they build a Passive House, it's like 3 to 4% more than what they normally build. So the more of the people that are on their fifth Passive House, or any of the other buildings except LEED, but I won't get into that, then that helps us all move towards that. Now, whether it's fast enough or complete enough, I will leave that to people more knowledgeable than I.
Wait, so
and
Sean,
then Joseph Allen should rewrite the book for that audience. Okay, enough.
Sean, when you said just now that there was a huge drop by the time you get to your fifth building, what is that attributable to?
typically you have your materials sourced. You also are planning in Passive House's case, you're planning all of your layers at an earlier point in the design process than you normally would, which saves a lot of money. Your crew is very skilled at what they're doing. And so all of your sub trades and everyone else understands about air barriers, thermal bridges, all of these different concepts in a passive house. And so that is what drives costs down. And I've seen very detailed spreadsheets from a few builders who have put them together showing that, there's a learning cost to building a high performance building. And by having people out there who have done it, that really helps to reduce that cost.
Yeah, vetting
Interesting.
materials alone and the research that goes into that.
Oh,
If you've
yeah,
got your
100%.
list of materials that have been vetted already, that's a huge savings.
And Passive House is going to be mad at me for saying this, but eventually not even having Passive House, because I don't know why I have to spend 12 grand to Germany in order to have my house be said that it's good. So once building code gets to the point where building code is the same thing, which happened in Norway, it's happened in other countries around the world. BC, where I'm from, we have a step code. By 2032, every single building that's built new in the province will be effectively a passive house. Step 5 is almost passive house levels of performance. So there won't be passive house at that point. It'll just simply be building code.
Once again, you're in Canada. We're still down here in the United States in terms of
100%.
what our average is, and it's unfortunate. And I don't know the percentages on our projects in terms of what builders typically build versus what we propose, but sometimes it's double in terms of the envelope and everything going into it, just because most of the time they're building something that's barely code or not even code. And our code is in Rhode Island is still the 2009 IRC. And so it's like, are you building a 2x6 wall with fiberglass bad insulation that's not installed correctly and vinyl siding, and that's it? And you skip the WRB sometimes, or you poorly tape zip sheathing. And it's hard for me because a lot of times what we propose is 2 times more expensive than what the average builder that we're working with is used to building. And so, I don't know if it's really 2 times, but it's hard sometimes to argue for these. And I think one interesting thing that goes along with that is, how do you market that to the builder for them to understand, and then also for the client to understand? And I think we've been pretty effective at that in the past couple of years of my company, getting the builder on very early, getting the client bought in very early, and searching out the builder who's already involved in the building science community and interested in this type of work, so that their level of standard is already higher. But it's difficult because I'm working on the top projects out there in a way, at least I think I am. And then many other people are not even close to that. And one thing that's nice is I've been able to communicate a lot with different builders, and they're hiring me as a consultant to help them with their different projects. And so spreading the knowledge and trying to, reach out to more people, and hopefully that brings the standard of quality up, but it's hard. And in Canada, I see it as a step above. Every time I look on Instagram, all the cool projects that I'm looking at, I'm like, oh, wow, look at that. Look at what they're doing there. Oh, yeah, it's in Toronto. Oh, wow, that's British Columbia. So it's.
I mean, we have parts of Canada that are far behind as well.
Of course.
And I'm not by any means holding us up to some great standard, because there's challenges here too. But that to be fair, that kind of goes back to my original point that, when you have that tract home builder in Texas that is not willing to spend that kind of money, and the homeowner that doesn't know anything about it or know that they should be demanding that house is built better, there's a certain amount that the bottom needs to be raised, through political or code or whatever it is, activities in the area. But you can bring that top cost difference down too by having, if you have a window manufacturer and they're going to do 1,000 windows a year that are passive house certified or whatever certification you want to go to, that's going to have a very different cost than if they're doing 1 million windows a year. So if we can get some of these big corporations to foot the bill for, basically developing that infrastructure, we can bring the cost down. We can hopefully, push through advocacy to bring the bottom up a little bit and meet somewhere in the middle. Because honestly, unless you find the right client, as you well know, and this is preaching to the choir, if you're double the cost, no one is going to buy it. because the homeowner doesn't know they should, and it's just simply not going to happen. As much as we all know it's the right thing and it should happen, it won't.
I wonder if, or Miguel earlier said, what we really need is a public health campaign. This is an epidemiologic challenge. I wonder if part of the, which is basically a marketing campaign. My mom was a public health or professional and helped reduce smoking rates in Maine, and Salem is one of the best states. And I asked her how do we convince people to reduce climate change. She said we need good marketers. She went on to say, like on Mad Men, like I didn't understand what a marketer was, but anyway, that's my mom. So I wonder if part of the benefit of this book, one, yes, it's absolutely to help pad the resume of the writers so they get more jobs, and it maybe not have direct impact on us, but I wonder how many small and medium-sized businesses who have grand plans, who can't afford to do well, who maybe aren't even building new, are reading this and say, oh, if this is what the big guys are doing, then maybe or should pay attention. If ventilation helps, if reducing bad chemicals helps increase productivity, maybe that's a way I can compete with the big companies. I'm sorry, I'm very stuttery tonight. Do you think this book or books like this have any impact? Like maybe not as a direct textbook, this is what to do, but more of just helping raise the overall awareness, or would we be better served with more direct programs and instruction?
Can I respond to that, Michael?
Of course.
You've got to look back 100 years ago to the tuberculosis and the flu crisis then. That what solved the tuberculosis crisis wasn't antibiotics. They didn't come for another 30 years. What came was understanding public health issues, lowering density, demolishing millions of slums all over, spreading people out, giving them proper bathrooms. The whole modern movement started as a reaction to the public health crisis at the time. If you've ever seen what Victorian apartments looked like compared to apartments from the 1930s in terms of get rid of all this stuff, make things cleanable, we're going to, I think, see another revolution like that in housing where people really care about having a healthy house. This book was great for the office sector, but these rules apply for homes. You've got to have your home that you can easily clean. You've got to have good ventilation that they called for there. None of this American recirculating the air 500 times and crappy filters. You can't even replace the filters in a lot of furnaces because they stop all the air. I think that the healthy house is going to be the very next big thing in building. And especially after COVID, people are really going to care about the ventilation, about the surfaces, about the filtering, about the dirt. And it's going to be a boom for passive house because they're tightly sealed. You add healthy house on top of passive house, and I think that is the future of home building.
Yeah, I agree. And to build on what Lloyd said and to further answer Michael's question there, really, marketing is absolutely required. But the people who are involved in the industry right now, none of us, including the company I work for, have anywhere near enough marketing dollars to reach out to enough people to make that happen. It is a public health issue, though, and should be treated as such. I mean, we've had plenty of those in the past. Lloyd brought up one very obvious one that's directly related, but even something so simple as seatbelts. Seatbelts were nothing for the longest time. And the public health pushed, also some rules. And now, depending on where you are, I know there's different, adhesion to that, but, seatbelts are pretty common. And there's been other, examples of that. Look at the efficiency of cars. Now, obviously, we're moving to much more efficient cars. But if you look at the chemicals that were put out and the gas fuel efficiency standards before we had the oil crisis and all of that, and people started regulating it, there's been massive improvements now. The biggest grossest pickup truck on the street right now, if it's a new one, is putting out cleaner air than your Volkswagen Bug was, or even your Honda Civic from the 80s. So there are definitely improvements, but it only happens when we have a public need for it, and that's a pull marketing basically, and we need to create those marketing opportunities. And one way to do that is to have buildings that people spend a lot of time in be these comfortable, healthy, efficient buildings so people can experience it. And then they all of a sudden want it in their house. I mean, Passive House did that on a very small scale. In Central Europe, they started building Passive House hotels. And people would go and stay in Passive House hotels, experience what it's like to be in a Passive House, and then all of a sudden say, oh, this is really quiet, and the air just smells nice. It smells sweet. You always hear that from people. It's so comfortable. And not a single one of them was talking about energy efficiency. And that's where the health really starts to come in and people start caring. Because if we focus entirely on pushing everybody all the way to the end right to start, we just don't get there.
I think the authors devote an entire chapter at least to building certifications, which of course started with LEED, and then they get into WELL and FitWell and Reset. And I think a lot of people in the green building industry these days like to give a lot of flack to LEED, and where would we be without it? I remember in the early 1990s seeing my very first LEED certification building, literally walking by it, noticing the plaque, taking note, and thinking, what is that all about? And looking into it and learning about it. And I feel like there's a place for that. You're talking about the Living Buildings Challenge, and that seems so cutting edge right now. Well, LEED seemed very cutting edge at the time, and it was an incredibly important educational tool that I feel like people are so critical of as being elitist. And I get it. I understand why that's the case, particularly when it comes to residential building. But I feel like we need to recognize that these authors pointed to all of these building certifications for that very reason. Flagship projects need to happen. And yes, they tend to be commercial because Fortune 500 companies have the money to put into it. Interface is an excellent example of a sustainability-minded major company. They do tile carpeting. And if you look up Interface, they do some phenomenal work. And they're leading the way for companies like them to follow suit. I don't think we can discount that altogether. We wouldn't have the Living Building Challenge if it hadn't been for LEED. I will stand by that. But what do you all think about building certifications? They're incredibly expensive. They're not open to all. Passive House is among them. The Pretty Good House is a direct response to the inaccessibility of some of these certifications, and the Pretty Good House is an excellent thing. So out of these elitist kind of unattainable for all benchmarks come other good things. And I don't think we can discount that. Flagship projects need to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, then what was mentioned in the comments a few times here, but one of the biggest issues is the existing building stock. And, building a new Passive House doesn't do anywhere near as much because new code buildings are actually considerably better than they were 20 years ago. I mean, a new code building is like an R2000 building, which is a very Canadian standard. I don't know if you guys are R2000 people, but basically, what used to be high performance is now code. But what that does do, though, is that, all of these multifamily passive houses, now we have access to small, efficient, energy efficient, properly used ventilation systems that can be used on retrofits. And they're much more affordable than they used to be, or even they exist and they didn't exist. So I agree. I think that a lot of these standards are kind of expensive and exclusive. And, especially when you start stacking standards on top of each other, you have a Passive House that's also a Living Building Challenge home that is also, et cetera, et cetera. You stack 4 or 5 standards and it's a beautiful home, and who wouldn't want to live there? But no one can afford that. But that's what breaks the ground and makes it possible. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, the first Passive House was built in BC for the Olympics. And almost universally, people said, this is great, but this will never take off. People will never pay for this. It's not going to happen. 5 years later, okay, so there's like 4 or 5 of these Passive House buildings, etc. Now, the city of Vancouver, I think, had like almost 4,000 units of passive house approved in building permits. And again, my world is passive house. I'm not saying it's the only standard out there. There's lots of them that are great, but we need to work along that line. Now, with the climate crisis the way it is, we need to go a little bit faster, but we can't go all at once, or people just won't do it.
When you talk about the building industry, one key point about the success of passive houses in Vancouver is that when they wrote the bylaws, they gave you a 5% density bonus, and they gave you a setback bonus reduction so that you could make the thicker walls without losing interior space. So the regulation and the corporate builders, everybody worked together so that you could actually do passive house without it costing you money, because you could sell the extra space and you didn't lose the interior space. And this is key. The builders and the regulators have to work together to make it work. And just those little changes made passive house just a no-brainer for people in BC who wouldn't turn down the area or the setback reduction.
Yeah, we're skipping the line for your building permits. That, 8 months of waiting for your building permits saves the developer a lot of money, or at least gets them closer to making money on that project. So that's again, we have to bring the bottom up. There's no doubt there, especially in the US. I mean, I've know a lot of my colleagues in the US that don't kind of have the, quote unquote easy, access to customers that are building these airtight buildings like we do up here. Say this all the time, but we need to drive the bottom up and top down and meet somewhere in the middle. Yeah, 100% agree with that.
I have a question. This is for everybody. It's a really general question. What do you think the role of education from a young age? So I'm not talking about educating the consumer who is already out there in society and, gainfully employed. But if I'm remembering correctly, education about environmental issues has been a thing in elementary schools and up forever. And this has driven a lot of conversations at home because the kids, rightly so, they are passionate about it. And I think this has produced change. So there's that avenue. So in addition to marketing, in addition to very wealthy companies being able to afford to implement these changes, I'm wondering what role education has to play.
I think it is the role that we need in this country, not just for healthy buildings, but for everything to make our country better. And it's, to me, that's the most important thing, because the kids can change, the kids can learn. Us, I'm not that old, but others are much older than me, and it's hard to change. It's hard for us to change. And, I can't stop changing. That's all I do. I always try to improve, and it sometimes takes a long time, but kids pick up things so quickly. And I also have 4 and 6-year-old over there behind me, behind the Healthy Buildings blue thing here. But I think that is the critical thing to help this country evolve. And there's this statistic that I don't know if I said on the last time I was on here, but something that really scares me from this country is that about 12% of American citizens can understand fact from opinion. And so if you think about what that means that we can't, as a society, determine what truth is. And so if we can educate our children to understand fact from opinion, they'll be able to understand how to make better selections of products, how to understand what healthy building is, how to read the BS and sift through all the greenwashing so that they can get to the truth. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think it's one of the most important things for our future.
If I just put a link into the chat to this organization in the UK called Architects Can, and it was set up by students, and it's an organization that basically says we have to change the education system from the ground up. It's a really wonderful resource. I teach sustainable design at Ryerson University in Toronto, and I'm basing my whole spring term just on their program when you go into the education system of all the things that everybody should know who studies design. And it's a brilliant program that I'm trying to get people in North America to do. It's so frustrating that I teach sustainable design as an optional course to third-year students when it should be a full-time course starting in first year. I absolutely agree with you. It's crazy. So this is a really wonderful and radical program, this Architects Can, that you can learn a lot from just going through and going through what they're trying to do. Speaking exactly to your issue.
Yeah, I also agree. I mean, I think education is absolutely crucial. And one thing, and I'm going to stand on a little bit of a soapbox for a second, but I won't get political, don't worry. But one thing that is missing in most Western countries, not the US, not just Canada, all of them, is the ability to have a discussion and disagree with people. And I think that that's something that we need to work on the education side as well. And how that applies directly to our industry is, if somebody is building a passive house and they're using foam insulation, they are not the enemy. They're trying to build part of the house better. They could do better with their material selection. I agree with that, but they're not them and us. We're both heading towards the same goal. We just maybe disagree or maybe can't quite get to the same place with a part of that. And I think that's a big challenge with how divisive everywhere seems to be right now, and leads to some of that fact versus opinion issues. Because you can almost always go on the internet and find someone that agrees with you. And so if that one person agrees with you, it must be right, correct?
That's why I'm on the panel.
Yeah, and that's how we have to work on the early education side of things. Is we need to make sure that people can have these discussions. And yes, green building as early as possible, but we also need to make sure people can have these discussions and disagree or have differing opinions.
We need to also build equity into all of that. That can't just be a conversation amongst, this is a whole other topic that I don't want to open up too much, but Kyle was mentioning the declare labels. There's also just labels, which are equally as important. And the education around all of these issues needs to include social equity. And that's all I have to say about that, because it's convoluted and
one thing I do like about the declare label is it indirectly addresses all of that, with climate change being affecting most of the ones that it can't afford, all the things inside this book. So
right. Yeah, those conversations, the education piece of it needs to be a lot more holistic than probably what exists in most schools and is available to most young people at this stage. That needs development.
Well, apropos of what Sean was saying about how difficult it's become in many places, not all places, to have a productive exchange of ideas on certain topics. I think the good news is that a lot of this is a skill that can be taught. I'm not talking about irrational attitudes, because that's something else entirely. But I remember years ago when my kids were little and in school in Tokyo, and there were people from all over the world. And one of my good friends was an educator from New Zealand. And New Zealand may be a small country in terms of population, but it is a mighty country in terms of education. And she showed me some of the curriculum material of basic skills that are taught starting in elementary school to all kids nationwide. And this was how to listen productively, and how to exchange opinions that you don't agree with your classmate. It taught you how to disagree in a useful way. So the material is out there. It doesn't have to be reinvented, but I think the trick is getting it to enough young people to have it make a significant difference. And I think that's where education policy comes in. I don't know what it's like in Canada, Sean or Lloyd. You know, here in the States, it's so individually state driven. It's very tough. I would like to see it being taught as something, the way you teach 1 + 1, or your ABCs, you know, just really, really basic stuff. You know, we have to start somewhere.
I've noticed that 1 + 1 is changing a little bit for my daughter's homework. They do math in a very different way.
When my kids were doing that stuff, they were taught 3 different ways to do 1 + 1. And then they had to choose the one that was the easiest for them to absorb. And you
I actually like the way they're teaching it now, but it makes more sense, sort of how I thought mentally about it, in terms of easy to.
Oh, I think you just muted yourself, Kyle, by accident, maybe.
Yeah,
Oh, I was done my
Okay.
statement.
Okay.
Okay, good. I'm going to interrupt here. Sorry. I apologize. My Zoom has been super glitchy tonight, and I have enjoyed the heck out of this panel, and you ran with it, and I didn't need to jump in. But since my name's at the top of the schedule or whatever, I'm going to say, hey, we're at 7:15 now, and we have 4 panelists, and I would love to hear your final thoughts from each of you tonight on either on the book, or, you know, what your takeaway was, or what you think the next thing should be. So I apologize if I'm totally frozen. It is not running well on my end.
Well, you have a ton of snow. You have an excellent explanation.
And your audio
So-
flowed perfectly. So everyone knows what to do. Final thoughts. Go team.
So may I pipe up?
Please.
I chose something that is really global, but I think without being a generalization. And it's just it's a quotation that probably most of you know, and but it's from Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist. And she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So I know a lot of what's going on in the world around us is very discouraging and daunting and all the rest of it, but so what? It's okay. You know, we just have to keep on keeping on and doing what each of us does, and we'll move forward.
That's a hopeful note. Thank you, June.
I wrote a lot because I decided if I was going to do a book review here, I might as well write one for Tree Hugger. So I've got like a whole book review here to go up in the morning, and I'm going to be revising it because I learned a lot from listening to all of you, and I'm going to be a little less harsh than I am on paper there, especially since I know it'll get read. But, you know, I think the key point out of this discussion, and particularly with what Sean was saying, is that the stuff in the book was important, but it was directed at the wrong audience in a sense. You know, the office building functionally, I believe, is dead as we knew it. But the housing industry, where everybody is working, where they're spending all of their time breathing the same air with a higher population in the place, this is the place that we really have a problem in the next couple of years. That we have to retrofit existing houses to get more air changes and to deal with humidity in winter because there are more people in them. And we've got to build all our new houses to, you know, all the standards that they talked about for corporations here. Healthy materials, good quality air, lots of air changes. Healthy buildings should be the big lesson out of this, means healthy houses.
To jump on
Hear,
that
hear.
real quick. So the houses are my thing. And so I think the big things that aren't mentioned in the book about houses specifically, there wasn't a lot of talk about cooking. And so if you want to go back to the previous podcast, I was one of the panelists on healthy indoor air quality in terms of cooking. And so basically induction is cleaner than gas. And if you ventilate it correct, you should be fine. sort of the main takeaway from that, and make sure you provide makeup air. The other thing that wasn't talked about much at all, because at offices, you're not sleeping a whole heck of a lot. And so sleeping is so critical in terms of health. And there's a couple articles that, since Miguel is in the chat box, Miguel, maybe you can paste those links you sent me. But I think that there's some really important science behind the healthy side of sleeping well in terms of all the different aspects of a healthy building. And the other one is cleaning, that they mentioned just briefly, but a lot of times people think of cleaning in terms of what are the chemicals that I'm putting in my building to clean with, and that's super important. But the other side of it is just vacuuming, and vacuuming not with a vacuum that's not a HEPA filter means that you're just spewing those air particles around the entire building and actually making the air quality worse than what it was before. And so that's just a simple little thing, but really need to be vacuuming with a HEPA filter so that you're capturing all of those small PM 2.5 particles and everything. Ultimately, I really enjoyed the book, and I'm glad that I read it. I wish I felt like I somehow didn't read the how indoor spaces drive performance and productivity in the beginning when I started reading this. So I had a false perception of what I was hoping this book to be. I'm very impressed with Joseph Allen. I'm not a business guy, but from a business perspective, I was really impressed to see that they at least attempted to try to put a dollar amount to the health impacts and the climate impacts from a health perspective beyond just the energy savings. And I think that that's a huge critical conversation point in terms of, in the United States, $1 saved in terms of energy was 59 cents saved in terms of health and climate change co-benefits. In developing countries, that's a $10 instead of a $1 saved. And I think that that's huge and important to understand. Of course, that'll change, and they, as the grid gets cleaner, and they mentioned that. And they quickly mentioned that, oh, and if you burn fossil fuels inside the building, that's also a problem. But that is super critical. And I felt like they spent a very little amount of time on that. And going all electric, I think, is the way to go here. But anyway, so I think once you get back to the house, it's really, we need to start being smarter and more natural in terms of the way we're approaching buildings. And I think the Pretty Good House is a great certification for that. And if you're not familiar with that, which you all should be, check that out, because it's sort of the simplified version of a lot of what we're talking about in terms of a certification that still hits all the main points.
Yeah, and for me, I think I'll also plug Pretty Good House because it's fantastic. For me, with the book, I think it does exactly what it set out to do. If you believe what the cover was their goal when they started writing the book. I think that it does serve their client base better, certainly, than it does anyone in, say, the residential space or other areas of commercial or institutional scale construction. But I like anything that points out the importance and tries to put a dollar figure to the importance of proper ventilation. And as that trickles down to our residential spaces where we sleep and live and eat and all of these different things, we will have much, much healthier buildings than the way that we ventilate currently in 80% of our building stock. So from that perspective, it's a step in the right direction. It was not a super long read, and I definitely learned a few things.
Great. Thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. The discussion was great. The chat box went wild. If you don't know how to save the chat box on your end with all the great links in it, let us know. Reach out to us. We can get you a copy of the chat box in a somewhat usable fashion. It's a text document. It's not great, but it works. And we want to encourage you to continue the conversation and the discussion. Kylie will post the blog post and the replay, I think, on Sunday. So thank you, all of our panelists and everybody who showed up tonight. It was a great show.
Thanks a lot. Great job, everyone.
I could just keep going.
Me too.
But I'm sure a lot of people are ready to go. So how do I end this thing? Let me look here.
Thank you, Lloyd, for being the harsh one. It's good to at least have somebody that's really going to rip it.
That's why I invited him. Okay.
Thank you all. It was great fun. Bye.
It was.
Good. Thanks, guys.